Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. Today is the 10th episode of Shastrartha, but today's format is going to be slightly different. So, usually, when I start this series or I go and have these discussions, I tend to have three panelists with opposing views sometimes, and we have opening remarks and we go about the session that way. But today's session is going to be slightly different. So, how is it going to be slightly different? Well, this is how we're going to go about it. So, this session was basically inspired from a public interest litigation filed in the courts in India in regards to legalizing same sex marriage. And as soon as I read about the litigation, a public interest litigation, and there was a serious discussion post that, and I was like, you know what? We should have a chat about it, but let's tweak the format. And so today's format is going to be, obviously we have three panelists. All three of them are part of the litigation. Originally there are four litigants, if I am right. So we have Abhijit. Obviously I don't need to talk about Abhijit. Everybody knows Abhijit. He's a regular on the podcast. Gopi Shankar M. He is a Tamil Nadu based intersex activist. He's also part. Giti G is here. Giti Thadani. She's a founding member of the Saki Collective Journal of Contemporary and Historical Lesbian Life in India. And G. Oorvasi is a transgender activist. We have three of the litigants today with us. So, Giti, I'm going to start with you. First of all, thanks for coming on the podcast. So, Giti, I'm going to talk about the anthropological perspective over here with you. Obviously, you having your background in anthropology and studying cultures, not just Indian culture, but cultures across the world. So can you tell me your perspective from an anthropologist and a person who studies these things in detail? How has the issue of LGBTQ been in India from a historical and anthropological perspective, and how can we connect it to our current realities and then bring it to this current PIL that you guys have filed?
Yeah, okay. The earliest same-sex rendering that I found is in cave paintings and goes back over 10,000 years. Just to set the story straight, that because one of the things that when I was active, first thing was there's no homosexuality that exists in Hinduism in India. That was one major argument which used to come out. Of course, when I started studying the text, and this is the Rig Veda, I found that many sections of the Rig Veda are different. So you can't basically classify entire Vedic literature as just coming from one perspective. That there are many perspectives, which is why the idea of polycosmology is extremely important. Now, this has, of course, been killed off by monotheism, and but what you do have in the Rig Veda is you have the idea of dual deities, twin deities. So you have the notion of the root of light, which is Diyu, and in Sanskrit you can basically configure it as singular, dual, and plural. Another from modern Indian languages. And on the other hand, you can also configure it as masculine, feminine, and neuter. So something which is very abstract can become both abstract and can have anthropomorphic qualities. So for instance, one of the versions in the Rig Veda is Dyava Prithvi. Now Dyava is the dual form of Diyu, but as one unit. It's dual, but the dual is one unit, and I'll explain to you what that means. Now, can you see this? These are two women which are fused at the umbilical cord, at the nabhi, and they are forming triangles. Yeah. Now, I saw this first in Chidambaram, and it must be about maybe 6th century, maybe 1500 years old. But they're still making it. I mean, some of the people in Tamil Nadu were still making it. I actually bought this replica from the Tamil Nadu Museum, but now they stopped making it. So you can't say something like this doesn't exist. You can only say that something like this stops being made. And why does it stop being made is another story altogether. But this whole concept of the dual is fascinating, because you have a notion called Dyava Prithvi, and this forms a triangle. You have 2 points, 2 light points, and you have Prithvi, which is the earth. So it's a triangle, and this triangle is moving. So the balance between the two triangles is shown as the interwoven triangle. Now, when this whole thing came up, one of the things on Twitter that I got was somebody from the Orthodoxy was screaming at me. Was saying your father's alcoholic, that's why you became a bohemian, and all of this is crap and degenerate and so on and so forth. And his point was, but your Prithvi is masculine, feminine. Now the problem is that when the Indologists translated it, including Indian Indologists, not all Indian Indologists, actually some of the Indian Indologists translated it correctly. And in fact, there was an old Sanskrit commentary which says two mothers, which describes Dyava as two mothers, because Dyava is also found alone. But the German Indologists and the English Indologists always translated Dyava Prithvi as father and mother. So father sky and mother Prithvi. Now that kills the abstract quality. That kills the whole notion of cosmology. They don't have the notion of anthropomorphic sculpture, so they call everything idol worship, which is a huge problem. And on the other hand, this fellow was arguing with me saying, oh, this is just this is just a compound word. Now, it took me about 6 tweets to tell him that, look, there's a difference between the compound linguistic structure in Sanskrit and dvivachan, which is a dual, singular dual. Now, what that actually gave me an insight is that he didn't know Sanskrit. He was just getting this orthodoxy from whoever. I don't even know whether he was actually coming from the Hindu Orthodox side or he was coming from the queer side, who were very angry that we were actually trying to show that there is a completely different Hindu celebratory space. Now, if you look at this dual, I actually found this dual in tribal forms of marriage. That two women get together, they wash each other's feet, and they eat from the same mango. This is somebody from two tribal women from Madhya Pradesh at that point. So you see, it's highly complex, and this dual form exists in several languages. So when I went to Mexico, this is what I found. Now this is over 2,000 years old. Now my thing is that this poses a lot of questions. Is on one hand the woke position and the orthodox position actually coming together? They're actually very similar because they both refuse any form of differentiation, any form of even thinking about, cosmology, multiple cosmology, the relationship with the abstract, because cosmology is also physics. So you don't have this simple separation between religion and belief that you have in a monotheism. So I think that's why this whole same-sex marriage under the Hindu Marriage Act is actually so explosive for both sides. Because it questions one, that nobody can have an orthodoxy on one position. Hinduism is not a monotheism. It's basically the positive philosophy is that you're born from the same womb. And then back to the idea of kinship. Now, the idea of kinship is we don't have, when did this sort of, father, mother, family come into being? Even in the entire India, kinship in Nair is different. Kinship, when I went to Ladakh and Spiti and Kinnaur, kinship is very different there. They used to tell me very proudly, they don't do it anymore. But this is, I think, in the late 80s. And they used to tell me we're born from the same mother. We don't know who our fathers are. So, the insistence that, family can only be there, partnership can only be there because you have children and you need the genetic code from both parents. I mean, I accept that there's a point there. But on the other hand, you also have to see that there are n number of different kinds of kinship systems in the entire world.
All right. So, okay, now let me go to Gopi. So, Gopi, let us take this into another realm right now. So, let us discuss the realm of the history of spiritual traditions in India. So, before we decided to do this podcast, obviously I had a long and interesting conversation with you on the phone, and where you were talking about a lot of things from a religious perspective, from the perspective of religiosity, and if you remember, I had asked you the questions about the Agama Shastras, right? About what do the Shastras talk about, what do the Shastras say, because naturally people are going to tell you guys that all of you are specifically asking for the legalization in the Hindu Marriage Act. So what's your perspective, and where do you come from in this entire thing? Because you were giving me a lot of answers from a Hindu spiritual perspective, so I wanted you to talk a little bit about that too.
The very first thing is that a lot of people who are commenting on such issues are neither aware of the diverse sex characteristics, gender identity, sexual orientation, and gender expression and gender identity. These differences basically, and our Sanskrit texts have clearly kind of classified all this with its own differences. And even the term religion or spirituality is quite Anglo-Saxonic, and the term religion originates from religare, which means to bind with. Like in the era of Crusades, it was pretty popularized by the church, and even masturbating a sin for them. So penetrating men and women penetrating face to face become a missionary position because the church approved it. But coming back to the issue of the Shastras, especially in Bharat, diverse indigenous gender variants have their own agama aligned with Nigama, and that is Amnaya. Most of them are not kind of Nischayena Agata, that is more rigid or a fixed structure. But such dharmic rituals followed by a diverse Indic Sogiyasi communities, and all of this rituals or the traditions of this diverse Sogiyasi communities originated from Asamantat Agat, that is passed down from diverse dharmic sources. Here, I don't prefer the word LGBT because it's very American and it is very limiting. So I use the word Sogiyasi, which means sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics, which is quite diverse, and it accommodates a lot of or a number of indigenous gender variants before Victorian era. So such Asamantat Agata Agamas or sectarian like Shanmata Agamas. The largest compilation is with Vaishnava Agamas we see, with nearly 200 distinct texts, and they are Pancharatra, and the I think the another one is Vikanasa, and it consists of several darshanas, rituals, and different types of bhakti margas, and all these took roots from the supreme Veda itself. The indigenous totems of the Indic Sogiyasi communities reflects emanations of all the Chaturvyuhas, and it is similarly shared with Kulamarga and Vidyapitas of the Shakti and the Shakta Agamas. This Chaturvyuhas can be like the Shankha and Chakra of Mahavishnu. You can see the same with the Aravan worship in Kutandavar temple. People may say, oh, it is not part of Vaishnavism. But the Chakras in the Kutandavar temple, which is indigenous, where Sri Krishna is married to Aravan, son of Arjuna and Ulupi. So coming to the next issue, that the whole Indic Sogiyasi communities from the beginning were integral part of the dharmic Hindu traditions. For example, we patronize Bahuchara Mata, Santoshi, Parvati, Ellamma, Mari, Mai, Renuka, Bhagavati, Mangala, Tara, Chinnamasta, Sharada, Shakampari, Harinegameshini, Vinayaki, Yogini, and many more. And we consider they are the protectors of our community, and we follow the gender-specific rituals designed for them to uplift our sanskaras, actually, to uphold and protect the dharmic integrity of Hindu Dharma. There are high priestess in Tamil Nadu, trans high priestess, whom we call as Thayamma, and trans and gender diverse priests, whom we call as Pusaris in Tamil Nadu, Sri Lanka, and Singapore. And these people, for a long time, have been performing certain rituals, and the Shastras, what we see itself is diverse from region to region. Like the existence, when we see like how our Shastras for the past 1,000 years have been classifying one of the 10 causes of binary, and diverse non-dual sex identity or sex characteristics or gender identity and expression and sex characteristics, is that these are the 10 causes we are listing. That is samskara, kama, sukarma, vikarma, sukrabala, mithuna vidhi, and paurusha, dosha, prakriti, and all it happens because of divine ordinance, which is known as Daiva. The diverse Sogiyasi identities mentioned in some literature are, Swarini, the Kama Sutra 2.8, the Kamini in Bhagavata Purana 5.24.16, the Stri Pumsa in Mahabharata and various astrological texts. And whether it is Sandhi or Suchivaktra, Vandya or Putragini, it is as mentioned, these names are mentioned in Sushruta Samhita 6.38. And the list goes on. Even Chakra Samhita 4.2, 4.4, and 6.30 mentions about the Sandhi, Narisanda, Varta, and Suchimukhi and Putragini. Who are this? What are this? So whatever I said, these are identities and classifications primarily refers to female women with same-sex desires, female women with diverse intersex traits, and female women who couldn't bear offsprings, etc. In Kulamarga, all the above said are venerated as part of the Shakti worship. The women with intersex traits are also known as Klebi, Klima, and Klima and Kliba. Chapter 27 from Lalitopakayana, that is Lalita Mahatmya. This particular text I read is from G.V. Tagar, and where in the Gananatha, where the chapter 27, it deals with Gananatha, where it refers the Devi's Entra. The Entra have 8 presiding deities, namely Alasa and Kripana and Dina and Nitandra and Pramilika and Kliba. So for the word Kliba, there are more than 30 meanings. But the primary meaning which we take, the word denotes, is in between, or that is neither male nor female, and it is one of the bija for Devi worship. In the traditional indigenous gender variant communities, they refer Kliba as Mabedi Husili, that is intersex, and they are highly respected within the traditional Kinnar, Hijra, Jugapa, Arvani systems. One of the major text reference we are seeing is from the Brihadaranyaka, verse 6.1.12, describes, Etak Klibaha Aparajayamana Retasa. It is saying Yatak Klibaha, which means thy body garment, that is thy body, that is garment, lived like intersex people without their offspring, but living with a vital force to realize the nature. So, in Sushruta Samhita 3.2 describes 5 types of sexual orientation among male, man, and man with intersex traits. They are Asekya and Sugandhika and Kumbhika and Isharyaka and Sanda. And one of the most important Vedic law codes of Bengal and Utkal region is Smriti Ratnavali by Ramanatha Vidya Vachashpati, who lived in 14th century AD. He mentions, with an exception, there are more than 20 sanda. Of all of them were accommodated as part of dharmic social stratification. What does it mean, dharmic social stratification? It means that, they lived as families. They lived with their partners, and they lived together, and their non-heteronormative societal needs and stratifications were protected, where these diverse Ogiasi communities of Bharat married each other under 8 stratifications like Brahma, Daiva, Arsha, Prajapatya, Asura, Gantharva, Rakshasa, and Paisacha. And most of the Tritiya Prakriti, that is beyond binary or dual nature, people wrongly denotes it to third gender or something, which is unscientific. The actual meaning of Tritiya Prakriti means beyond binary or dual nature. The most of the Tritiya Prakriti marriages took place under the Gandharva, type. And those people reading the actual texts need to realize beyond the heteronormative nature of such marriages, or not merely as binary for progeny alone, actually. And marriage as a form of institution formed around the concerned diverse Indic Sogiasi communities, who are otherwise LGBT communities in the modern term, was this marriage as a form of institution was formed for this diverse Indic, communities, Sogiasi communities, to elevate their adhyatmic values, and it helps them to channelize their energy, life together with their beloved in a more ethical manner to protect them from falling in darkness. One of the great Alvar, Namalvar, who born in the 43rd Kali, around 3059 BC, as per the the Sri Vaishnava texts, in his sacred Thiruvaimoli, 2.5.10 in Divya Prapanda mentions that, being my beloved, dearest Sri Vishnu is neither a male nor a female. Now, if said that Sri Vishnu is intersex, then they are not that too. Sri Vishnu does not become available for ordinary vision of the senses. Sri Vishnu is neither the existent nor the inexistent like the ordinary objects, but Sri Vishnu shows them in various iconic forms as well as in iconoclastic form. When Sri Vishnu wills to nurture the souls, thus there are a large number of perspectives in which Sri Vishnu can be understood. If you want to categorize Sri Vishnu verbally, here, to celebrate this fluidity in of Sri Vishnu, in Trichy Sri Ranganatha Swami temple, which is the Sri Ranganatha himself, we believe the Kul Devata of Sri Rama. And this in Trichy Sri Ranganatha Swami temple, we call something called Matru Seve, which means cross-dressing or transitioning as women. So was introduced. The temple priests invoke Lord Ranganatha as Tayar, that is Supreme Mother Lakshmi. Lakshmi Tantra, which influenced the large Vaishnava, not just Vaishnava, also Samkhya, and Jain and Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions, celebrates the aspect of Sri Vishnu's divine mark, Sri Vatsa, where Sri Lakshmi resides, will remain as Sri Lakshmi to accompany Sri Vishnu, who is transitioning as Sri Lakshmi again. So where Sri will be merging with the Sri, that is Lakshmi will be merging with Lakshmi in this tantric tradition, which is celebrated even now. We see it in Sri Ranganatha Swami temple. And in Bharatiya Adhyatmic systems, everything in Prakriti, including divine forces, was attributed sex characteristics, either whether it is masculine or feminine or neutral. There are stories of two masculine divinities, the Tattva, Hari and Hara, coming together for a purpose, to bring forth Dharma Shastra, Ayyappa, another divinity, which their combined qualities and principles. The divinity of Ayyappa however, is commonly referred to only as Harihara Putra, meaning son of, Ari and Hara. Even though, Hari took the form of Mogini, we don't call it as, Hara Mohini Putra. We call him as Arihara Putra, actually. So the point is that, in fact, these people were integral part of, our society and system. And to accommodate them under the particular law, which is Hindu Marriage Act itself, was formed, in late 1950s and during Jawaharlal Nehru's time. And the law is quite heteronormative, and it is not accommodating the diverse Indic dharmic perspectives in the law, which itself is trying to homogenize, with a very kind of particular cultural superiority over the another cultural, which is not very prevalent over certain regions or area. And so in this particular context, because we have puberty ceremony. For example, in Tamil Nadu, more than 80 different castes celebrate the puberty ceremony in a very different manner, and they have their own, way of performing the, marriage rituals. Of course, most of them are based on the Vedic traditions, the Shastras which are mentioned. But then there are people, certain communities who perform the Vivaha without, Homagni. Because one of the question was, who will sit as Ejamana? Sri Ram sat, in the Homa, where he didn't had Sita Maya. He had to order a kind of a Pratima to make to sit her with him. And these are like, things. For example, in a lot of traditions, we see that, when certain, group of certain communities, in their girls, when they have, for their girls, they have some issues in the horoscope, in their Jataka. Their first marriage will take place with, banyan tree, or mostly with banana, plant. So, and immediately the plant will be sacrificed. So,
all right. So Gopi,
there are several such texts. That's it. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So Abhijit, now, so we've covered a bit of the anthropological side. We've covered the traditional side, and I'll come back to Gopi and Giti. But here's my question to you, because leave the anthropology, leave the history aside. Let us forget about all of that. Let us look at it purely from what I call a secular realm, right? Because there are secular arguments that can be made too now, but there have been, I don't know, and I don't know, I'm trying to play the devil's advocate here, and I hope everybody understands where I'm coming from. But I've read comments as usual on social media that says, oh, this leads to social degeneration, or I don't know what. It's like, I don't get that angle, but I want you to answer that too. And we answered the kind of, oh, it's not part of the scriptures, Gopi took care of that. But I still am, I'm still not understanding this angle, Abhijit, that why the Hindu Marriage Act? Why not the Special Marriage Act? Like, explain that to me. I want you to take on first. This leads to social degeneration. Please, what do you have to say to that?
Okay. So first thing is, till life expectancy in India was around the 25-26 mark, right up to 1930. 1935. It was only in 1935 that life expectancy crossed 30 years. Okay. Before that, all our ancestors used to get married at the moment they hit puberty. 9 years, 10 years, 12 years. The Rani of Jhansi was married off at 14 years of age. Right? Do you consider that social degeneracy? Because right now the age of consent is 16, I believe, right? For women. So the question is, what defines social degeneracy to me, first of all? Because see, the argument that's made is that this enables pedophilia. Now, the issue is most of pedophilia that happens is actually heterosexual pedophilia. Okay, not homosexual pedophilia. So that again, so in which case I think it's a heterosexual marriage that is leading to degeneracy, and we should ban heterosexual marriages if that is the argument that you want to make. On a lighter note, I mean, the most degenerate people I know are the wokes. I mean, from that point of view, we're actually taking the conversation up a bit more. You can't get any lower than wokes. But getting back to serious issues, we also have the question of what is degeneracy. Okay, it implies that you're somehow going back. Now, you look historically, there are many traditions. I can equally show you, just like in the Vedas, you have, peaceful stuff, you have atheist stuff, you have violent stuff. Like, the Battle of the 10 Kings, Sudas in the Battle of 10 Kings is fought over people not doing the homas properly and things like that. Now, the issue here is, in Hinduism, like the Vedas, which sort of allowed every stream of thought a few shlokas and accepted all streams of thought, you don't have to accept homosexual marriage. Right? You don't have to say that ye mera credo hai karke. The point is, the Hindu Marriage Act forcibly uniformizes an extraordinarily diverse set of beliefs that existed. So, for example, I can tell you from the Nayars in Kerala, or I think was it the Khasis or Garos in the northeastern states. Polyandry was very common. I know a Nayar lady somewhere in Palagad, in my district, who had 27 husbands, 7 of them simultaneously. Is that degeneracy? And she got married ultimately into the royal family of Kerala. So are the royal family of Kerala degenerates? Because they own the Padmanabha Swami temple as well. They're the trustees of it. And if you go back in their history, there's a heck of a lot of polyandry out there. So, there's this... Hinduism has never been about forcibly. You can say that this is gay marriage is perfectly okay, or you can say gay marriage is disgusting. Hinduism allows you both. Okay. The point here is the gay marriage people can't shove things down the gay marriage is disgusting people. And the gay marriage is disgusting people similarly can't shove down their opinions of gay marriage down gay people who want to get married. The problem with the Hindu Marriage Act is, because of this uniformization, number one, and this is only one part of the problem, the second is in the Hindu mind itself, is that because of this uniformization, everybody has to fight for their rights within this sort of rubric of the Hindu Marriage Act. Number one. Number two, this need to sort of, my way is the only way and your way is the highway. Imagine if every Hindu school decided to start doing this. Advaita says Dvaita is an illegitimate stream of thought. Or Dvaita says Advaita is an illegitimate stream of thought. Or Samkhya says, I don't know, Vaisheshika is an illegitimate school of thought. Or Vaisheshika says Cārvāka is an illegitimate school of thought. It is only Vaisheshika, and so on and so forth. Ye kahan se Hindu bana? So, there is this sort of need to uniformize. And I find this particularly funny with Hindus who claim, that, we are a monotheist religion. As if somehow monotheism is superior to polytheism or animism or shamanism or something like that. Our ancestors never felt the need to say that monotheism or polytheism or is superior to in the forest. Everybody could worship their own way. And similarly, there were also instances of extreme religious violence in the past. Right? There is the story, I forget the name of the Alvar in question. I think Gopi can help us here. But under the Pandya king, he ordered the impalement, the live impalement of 8,000 Jain monks. because he converted the king back from Jainism to Hinduism. It is actually depicted on the roof of the Madurai Meenakshi temple. Okay, so it wasn't also hunky-dory. We've had these instances in the past. Shaiva, sorry, the Shaivite, this thing. Who was the, this one, Gopi? Who was the saint in question?
I think it was Tirunjana Sambandar and Upper Tirunjana Sambandar.
Yeah. It was Tirunjana Sambandar who ordered the impalement, the live impalement. And you know what live impalement means? They take a sharpened spike, they insert it up your anus. It goes through all your entrails and things, and it goes in as deep as possible. And then the spike is left standing. Okay. This man is revered as a saint. And he did this to Jain monks, peaceful Jain monks, by the way. Not that there wasn't reciprocal violence from that side also. But, you know, this sort of, this illusioned, imaginary notion. There was religious violence in India. But what I find particularly worrying, I don't actually find it worrying. What I find amusing, actually, is that these people seem to think there is this uniform definition of Hinduism, there is this uniform history of Hinduism, and everything needs to comport to it. Otherwise, it is not Hinduism. So that is number one, answering your degeneracy question and the issue of diverse opinions within the community. That said, remember, they have the right to call us degenerates, just as we have the right to call them morons. Thankfully, if you look at it, most of these sort of Twitter warriors, they are all nameless handles who have zero credentials except having some anonymous handle on Twitter. Whereas if you look at 3 of the 4 petitioners, Giti is a chronicler of Hindu temples. Gopi Shankar was a probate of the Ramakrishna mission. Oorvasi Akka is a pujari at a temple. So these people, anonymous internet Hindus, somehow know more than a pujari, than a Ramakrishna mission probate, and a chronicler of Hindu temples somehow. I am meant to believe this, apparently. Why the Hindu Marriage Act is because we are all very, very clear about this. All 4 of us are very clear that we are Hindus. We are not going to seek our redress within the secular constitution of India. We want it within the Hindu. We want to be acknowledged as Hindus, and to do it within our Shastras, not outside the Shastras, not under the Constitution of India, but under the Shastras or under the Dharma Shastras. And we are very clear about this. This is a Hindu issue. We are not going to fight for everybody, especially not with people that go around chanting, free Palestine, Kashmir ki Azadi and things like that. We are not. That is not our bandwagon. Thank you very much.
I just want to add one more point to Abhijit, what Abhijit said. Why under Hindu marriage law, in the sense like act in the sense, 95, like so majority of the LGBTI weddings which took place so far in India only took place in temples, not in masjid or churches. So, and when the ritual is taking place in the temples, and when the pujari is performing certain rituals for them, why don't the law is recognizing it? If the 95% wedding is
registrar. It is the registrar who is not recognizing it. It's not the temples who are not recognizing it. Right. So if you remember the Madurai bench, I think Gopi was the one that fought the case. The Madurai bench of the Madras High Court forced the Tamil Nadu government to register the marriage under the Hindu Marriage Act. And here's the amazing thing. The religious people, the temples had no issue with it. You look at all the Dharma gurus, for example, when Shri Ravi Shankar, for example, was asked about it, he said, love is between 2 souls. The body is irrelevant to it. Right. I can give you lots of examples like this. So the religious part of it isn't the problem. The problem is this so-called secular construct, forced homogenization called the Hindu Marriage Act, imposed on us by the most favorite Hindutvavadi of the right, a man called Jawaharlal Nehru in 1955. Okay. And I just find it amazing that people who spend their entire 18 hours awake, or I don't know how much time they spend awake. I mean, for their 18 hours awake, they might as well be sleeping 24/7. Who spend all their waking time abusing Nehru. They are so attached to this law as somehow symbolic of their Hindu identity, imposed on them by a man that they hate and detest through and through to their guts.
Yeah, so, okay, Abhijit, I just have a few follow-ups to you.
Sorry.
So, Giti,
sorry.
yeah, please. No, please go for it. Go ahead.
But you see, even say the modern movement, when we first started, actually the first sign of visibility of, visibility, quote unquote, was when two policewomen got married in the late 80s, 87 or something, I've forgotten. They got married and they went to the village and, had it in the temple. And it was all over the newspapers. So, in fact, when the movement first took off, whatever, it wasn't a movement then, it was just a very small group of people. But that time the thing was that this is traditionally there, that you've had traditional spaces, but actually the modern spaces come from the Victorian, British period, who basically introduced, the 370, introduced the law of unnatural sexuality. And today it seems as if, the orthodoxy is actually trying to take recourse on that law. I mean, they're saying, okay, you got rid of that law, but, you're going to become now a more degenerate, you're going to ask for adoption. My other point is that, why should any form of union only be, geared to progeny? Because you have not just many forms of marriage, but you also have many forms of union. I mean, I know two people who were together and, their union is their art form, or they practice their science, or, they're musicians, so there's so many possibilities of living very, very powerful unions together. So why should it, it's not just the idea that of same-sex marriage, but it's also the idea of what kind of union. And we have many of these forms of union.
To just add one more thing to Giti ji, I just want to highlight there are women with XY chromosome who happen to be mother of at least 2 to 3 children. These women are with, intersex traits, but I mean, like, they were assigned as female at birth and they're living as women. The very kind of core definition of the binary sex, which originates from the heteronormative, Eurocentric science, itself is highly problematic, which invented this so-called sex-selective surgery to change the newborn infant, when that infant is not kind of conforming to the binary sex identity. They changed the sex of the baby. The Madurai High Court banned it in Tamil Nadu. We became the second place in the world to have a legal regime now, and the first place in Asia to have that legal regime in a state with 80 million people. And this is not just about same-sex marriage. Any marriage out of heterosexual setup under our Hindu dharmic tradition. Nowhere in the world you see a continuing, living, adhyatmic, a dharmic tradition for non-binary, sex identities or non-binary gender identities or diverse, sexual orientation. We can see that particular traditions only here because we were also the people who stratified different society for, different sections in the society. And they had their own dharma. What they may do, it is ethical or not ethical is a different thing. But they were treated as integral part of Hindu dharma. They were not thrown out of the circle and said, oh, you're not part of this dharma. What is happening now is they are trying to do that to us actually, which means they are damaging the dharma, not us actually.
All right. Okay. So Abhijit, I'm going to start taking a few audience questions. So I'm going to start with this. Again, it's very interesting that, again, they keep asking and they're saying, so what are your thoughts about, so let's take this scenario, Abhi. Eventually, India is moving towards a uniform civil code. And, if there was a uniform civil code, you know that the opposition is always going to come from certain, the most peace-loving communities in India, and how are we going to deal with that? I mean, obviously, the violent ones are always Hindus. So how do we deal with that peace-loving quotient in India, and how do we deal with those communities? It's obvious that LGBT people exist outside the Hindu fold also. So how do we deal with those poor folks who are stuck in the rigmarole there?
Look, I've generally held, if you notice, I never celebrated the banning of triple talaq on Twitter. I've generally held that minorities should make their own decisions. It's not for a majority to sit and impose their beliefs down a minority's throat, no matter how regressive, simply because it feeds this whole, victimization narrative. All right. Now, anyway, the government's gone ahead and done it. I don't see what's stopping them from introducing the Uniform Civil Code. If it comes through, that's great, because then you have a precedent. See, the problem is when you have a Uniform Civil Code, one of the fears is that because of the block voting of certain peaceful communities, the Uniform Civil Code will itself be a sort of regressive this thing. Remember when the Nirbhaya laws were brought in, it was the same so-called progressive feminists who insisted on a gender-specific rape law. They didn't want a gender-neutral rape law because, male rape by women is also very common. People don't talk about it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It does happen. So on one hand, you have sort of this regressiveness of the progressives. On the other hand, you have this regressiveness of the peacefuls. So what is your consensus document on the Uniform Civil Code going to look like? So one of the reasons we want to do this is because we want to get this notion of the multiplicity of genders joining in a union of their own accord, consensual union of their own accord, to be formalized in the system so that it can't really, the fight to push it back if a Uniform Civil Code comes will take quite a bit of a fight, number one. Number two, the thing about, a Uniform Civil Code again, and this is quite curious because the West, the way you look at it moving, is that they're going into why should we define marriage at all as between, because this is a very Christian definition. It is the union of a man and woman kind of thing. So you're literally, there's that sort of Abrahamic Judeo-Christianism sort of built into your very notion of marriage today. The third point out here, which is regarding the protections that you require. Now, India is one of those countries that allows single parent adoption. The question is, when you've got two parents, while one parent can adopt, what happens to the inheritance? What happens to the financial security? Because see, if you're not in a wedding or something like that, can the person who is not the single parent adopter, if that person dies or something, the natural instinct for his or her family of birth is to take all that property back and see to it that the child doesn't get it. Okay. You've seen this even with regular families. I mean, property disputes are 90% of what is logging up your legal system and things like that, right? No, family disputes, not property disputes as such. I don't think there's anyone on this podcast or anyone on Twitter that doesn't have a family property dispute hanging somewhere around their necks at some point of time. What about the financial security? Who is the beneficiary going to be if both the parents die? You're not even willing to recognize both the parents in an adoption. Okay, if they're of the same this and that. So, financial security and things like that are a huge issue out here. The protection of the child who gets adopted is a huge issue out here. So there's a whole load of things that you have to look at in terms of this. This isn't a simple, straightforward just a religious thing as well. There are also greater legal issues involved in this, especially the protection of people as a whole and of their financial security, because remember, all emancipation comes from financial security.
All right. So, Giti, I have a question for you now. Somebody has asked, who's watching this, do you think before a law like this is passed, some people need to, arrange some sort of interaction for a better understanding and acceptance? Now, my question would be, Giti, has there been any attempt to have made ever on the part of the LGBT community at a larger level? And I'm going to ask a follow-up to that because there is a lot of politics involved too. Because somebody has made a comment and a question too, that the LGBT community is fragmented along ideological and political lines in India, with such a giant chasm between us. How are we gonna get this done? You obviously know. Let's not beat around the bush. There is a huge political problem in India when it comes to the LGBT community, that a lot of times I was seeing it on Twitter when Abhijit tweeted about it, and he had tagged you, and there were these regular people who were saying, "Oh, look at you going to these Hindu jihadis." I was like, "What the hell, man? It is about human rights. It is about freedoms. I mean, everybody has a right to talk about it." So you clearly have this chasm. So, Giti, how do we actually go about reaching out to people in such a scenario?
Well, I think that's precisely what this attempt is. I mean, this public litigation, tentative is also to bring up, to basically also say that they are non-binary people from the Hindu side, because what's happened is that the entire movement has been hijacked by the left, not just by the left, but by people who were, when I was active, were totally homophobic. I mean, the left was really homophobic. The so-called progressive feminists were totally homophobic. I mean, in 1996, when I said we should be fighting to get 370 removed, and at that time we didn't use gay, lesbian, we use alternate sexualities, not alternative, but alternate, which goes back into the concept that there is a plurality. You don't even define a norm. At that time, people were basically saying, what do we need to get? Why do we need to get rid of 370? It's never used on anybody. So there was a lot of hostility just in terms of even understanding the context of 370, the context of what it meant to get a legality and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, what happened is that in 1996, when I tried to get my book published in India, the feminists rejected it. All the press, the entire publishing houses in India rejected it. And eventually it was picked up by an English publishing house. But they basically censored all what was positive about the Hindu tradition without my knowledge. They basically took out half the book.
Wow.
They took out half the book and they changed the title. I didn't want to call it Sakhyani. I basically called it Ecology of Desire. And I would have thought, when the book came out in 1996, that people could build up on that work. But actually what happened was the inverse. I basically was censored because I was never called to present anything on that, on the Hindu traditions, on the positive Hindu traditions. Actually, even talking about anything positive in the Hindu traditions was deemed a problem. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was invited to Bengal, to one of the universities there, one of the main universities there, to give a lecture. So I gave the lecture and they said, how, one of the lesbian women from Kerala, she said, how can you show destruction of Hindu sculpture? This fuels Hindutva. That was the end of discussion. All the other members, some of whom I knew, refused to talk to me. I've known them, some of them for 25 years or something. They just refused from that moment to talk to me. Now, the only reason I'm basically saying all this is because this is the chasm that has happened within the movement. And the amount of foreign funding that is now coming in, it's not coming for GLBTQ issues. It's basically coming to break up India. It's basically fueling the Tukre Tukre gang. It's basically fueling the Hinduphobia. Whereas at least when I was active, say the European activists that I knew who would support the kind of work we were doing were really coming out of genuine solidarity. that is now over. I mean, what one is living now is, that these people are supporting Sharia law, but not the Hindu Marriage Act. They're criticizing us of saying, what about the poor peacefuls and what about the poor Christians? What will happen to them? I mean, I'm a Hindu. I take responsibility for my own community and the fights within my own community. These are the people who break up the movement. I don't have a problem if they file something under the Special Marriage Act, or they file something in the different religious frameworks. I don't have a problem with that. I'll support them. But this is the chasm that they have done. And it was so bad that, for instance, I had a robbery done in my place and everything was taken away. My entire camera equipment, computers, fax, everything, also the Sakhi equipment. And it was done by somebody who was working with Sakhi. She took it because she had the keys. Everybody knows her within the queer community. She's no more now. But they kept on basically publicizing that the Hindu right has done the robbery. And every time I have to write to these people, look, the Hindu right hasn't done it. It's somebody from the community who's done it. And they would still keep publishing the fact that the Hindu right had done this. So I would say that the chasm that's come about in the communities is also a reason why you have this extreme fear from the Hindu orthodoxy.
Yeah. I get it. I totally get it. So just Abhijit has to go. So just one last question, Abhijit, for you, and then I'll continue with Giti and Gopi. So he's actually very interesting, Abhijit. I don't know. It's a hypothetical. Somebody has asked, should parents be allowed to genetically tailor children's sexual orientation before it's birth? Because, with CRISPR coming up and all these things coming up, we really don't know where this is going to end. And on one more question is, do you think the large portion of the LGBT community supports the left ideology? Majority of Indians also are feeling kind of a disconnect with them. So you can skip the CRISPR part, but I just wanted to give you the hypothetical if you want to take it on. I mean, I just found it to be fascinating. That's all.
So see, there's two parts to this. One is the fact that, the left thrives on victimhood narratives and gripe. And invariably, when they come to power, they're the most ruthless in wiping out any form of non-conformity. You look at China even today, what they're doing to Muslims. One of the biggest supporters of, religious rights for Muslims used to be the USSR in the 1910s, 1920s, and through the 1930s. Nobody historically has managed to wipe out Muslim culture the way the USSR did in Central Asia. Right? So they're fantastic at turning victimhood and gripe into a weaponizable this thing. The problem is, look at the consequences of what happens. Russia was, after the fall of the Soviet Union, they sort of legalized homosexuality and all of that. And because of this intersectionality, because the LGBT movement was seen as a sort of American front for pushing their sort of human rights agenda or something, the pushback today has been so severe against Russian LGBTQ that it's not even funny anymore. It's gone back to the, I don't think it's been fully recriminalized, but for all effects and purposes, it is criminalized. You can't show gay propaganda. Apparently, two men kissing, you can be sent to jail for showing two men kissing or for two men kissing in public, or a transgender and a man, or a transgender and a woman, or two women kissing in public, because it constitutes foreign propaganda. So, measure this carefully. I think the second issue also amongst the LGBTQ community, and this is sort of, unfortunately, it's not an entirely inaccurate stereotype, that the overwhelming majority of them tend to be in humanities professions, which are the bulk of the woke. I don't know what kind of inferiority complex that breeds, that you have to keep seeking refuge in victimhood, but there is an issue out there. So this was the second part of your question. Sorry, it was a long question. What is the first part of it?
The first part was a hypothetical, like, should parents be allowed to genetically tailor children's sexual orientation?
against this kind of genetic tailoring because it's interfering in natural processes. Right. And this is like wanting mera bacha gora hona chahiye. Mera bacha beta hona chahiye. So you're basically circumventing the female feticide ban or the criminalization of female infanticide by determining the sex of your child coming beforehand. Okay. Or you want, because you want to fall for this fad that white is beautiful and you want your kids to be white. Okay, you will even now, if you go into the marriage matrimonial columns of Times of India, Hindustan Times, and all of that, you will see there are so many advertisements that are published, including in the Hindu, saying bride must be fair, must be fair and very beautiful, no other criteria required. I'm looking at going, are you serious, dude? See, in a sense, that is genetic engineering. Right.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that tells you that homosexuality isn't there is an argument it's genetic, but it's also epigenetic. There is a lot of scientific evidence to show that it's epigenetic. Right. What are you going to do then? Because if producing kids was the only intent of a long-term union, not even a formalized legal marriage, how do you see homosexuality quite commonly amongst other species as well? Technically, it should have died out. Homosexuality should have died a natural, not natural. And yet it's not died out. Right? So there is a lot of issues out here to consider, but I am generally against this. Let's call it what it is, eugenics. That is what Nazi Germany tried, and that is one of the most dangerous paths you can go down. Eugenics is never a good idea because natural diversity happens for a reason. It happens in response to certain natural stimuli. It is nature's way of creating diversity and preserving species and things like that. So, the problem with this debate is that it's so polarized that, I see no point even trying to convert certain people over through discussion or whatever, because it doesn't matter what points you make, it's basically their way or the highway. And that's about it.
Yeah, I get it. So Gopi, I have a question for you now. So here somebody has said, do you think our very diversity of religions is kind of becoming a major barrier for recognizing such an obvious thing such as same-sex marriage? What do you think, Gopi? Gopi, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I'm sorry. So, no, the point is that, first of all, I don't consider Hinduism as a religion, one thing. The second thing is that we call it as dharma than religion. That's why I started with the concept of how the term religion, the etymological sense of the term religion, how it originated and all that. And our diversity is our strength, even in this particular matter and issue. Only thing is that we are not aware of, the diversity. We are quite ignorant, actually, because what is happening in the down south, the person in the west and north is not aware of it. And what is happening in, northeast or, west, this people living in the south is not aware of it, actually. So that is the problem. And I think because, we know about Mirabai in Tamil Nadu. How many of the, people there in the north know about Andal, who born before, several years ago, I mean, like even centuries ago, so, a millennium ago, before, Mirabai. So even our own, diverse sons and as well as, great seers, we are not kind of aware of their name and the literature they contributed to, the wonderful tradition. Because some in the Western North believes that, Ghazals, Hindustani and all this are the greatest, and they don't know anything about Shyama Sastri or Muthuswami Dikshita or Tyagaraja, or they don't even I've been seeing that we have become culturally ignorant society and blaming the diversity for our ignorance, because of which the dharma is actually suffering. And the people who actually believe in that dharma and live in that dharma, or who are trying to serve that dharma, are those people who are suffering because of their ignorance. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to comment on that question.
Sure.
Yeah, well, one thing I feel is, look, we are living a civilization wound. So, all those centuries and centuries, millenniums of violent invasion. I mean, it's like my family comes from what is not India today, where Ghazwa succeeded. So we lost language, we lost everything. But on the other hand, when you see that you have these traditions of diversity, and you also have traditions where, look, whatever it is, there's been a certain aggressive response from within our own communities. But I think that's fine. Let it happen. At least let it happen. It's like, how does change happen? Change happens when you suppress something for a long time, and then it comes out, and then there is a resolution of a conflict. Now, if you have diverse traditions, there's much more possibility of diversion and much more possibility of resolving conflict. You don't have to go around killing the other person to resolve the conflict. And I think this is what's happening, because I basically feel some of the debates are getting more nuanced. Some of it is very blocked, but something will emerge out of that. I mean, I'm having young people write to me on Twitter now, saying they're so happy with this. They're spreading it in Odia, they're translating it in different local languages. It's helped some people to come out to their family. So I think there are many, many positive things which are also coming from this, millennium-long diversity, despite a civilization wound, despite the fact that we're living so many conflicts at this time.
Yeah, I agree.
Very severe conflicts, very, very, because this is an existential conflict for the nation all the time.
Yeah.
Because of these LGBT types are going, some of these LGBT types are going around tukre. Basically, it's questioning questioning the existentiality reality of the country.
Yeah. I agree. So, Giti, I have a follow-up question for you from someone who's watching this live. They say most of the people who oppose this act are from a certainly older generation. So, do we wait for them to kick the bucket, or what can we do to change their minds? What's the way forward? So it's a pun on your generation, Giti.
It's a pun on my generation. But I'll tell you something. I recently visited my uncle and aunt, two of them, actually two sets from my Sindhi side, and another Sindhi aunt. And I remember when my book was first published, they published something in a local Sindhi, Sindhi magazine, celebrating the fact that I had come out as a lesbian. And my aunt, who is she's my mother's generation, so she's in her 80s. She said, "Here, have a chocolate, melty kiss." My other aunts and uncles, who are now close to 90 or whatever, I mean, they just celebrate the fact of who I am. I mean, they don't care. They had a love marriage themselves, and they celebrate. I mean, basically, they have absolutely no issues with me or my brother. So I don't think it's just a generation thing. I think it's really a question of I really think that a lot of the fear is also coming from this extreme, like I said, this extreme fear of, we're going to lose our civilization if we get this, what they perceive is coming through the West, which is actually very negative, because, the whole GLBT movement is really coming out of this victim ideology. And I don't like it. Personally, I don't like it. So I share the fear too. So I can see it from, different emotive points of view. But on the other hand, I also feel that, the people in our community who are, who don't necessarily make a point, they won't go on Twitter or something. Like I remember this case when these two policemen, women got married. And, we grew up with my grandparents. And my grandfather said, this happens. It's perfectly normal. And he used to drink whiskey with my lesbian friends. I mean, I don't drink whiskey. I drink wine occasionally. But he would have a drink with so many of my friends who would come. They'd have a drink with him. They talk with him, so on and so forth. He had absolutely no issues. So I also think that this is also very much part and parcel of, say, this, this very, very beautiful differentiating human spirit. And I mean, they live partitioned. So they came as refugees. So I don't think it's just domination.
Yeah, I kind of relate to you because my nani was also from Lahore, so kind of Punjabis and Sindhis have this unique perspective when it comes to the partition, even Bengalis for that matter. So let's be fair on the Bengalis too. So Gopi, one more question to you. What I've understood, Gopi, in this entire discussion is that there is this hangover of Victorian values, on a certain section. I'm not talking about the Abrahamic section of society. I'm talking within the family of dharmic traditions. There is a Victorian moral hangover on our society. And a lot of times the objections that I have heard, obviously I'm not talking about the serious objections. And I'm being very honest here. I'm trying to reach out to some serious Hindu scholars, and I'm going to maybe do a discussion from their point of view where they might say, the Shastras don't talk about it. And that's fair enough. I think even they need to be heard. But the point is, somewhere at the level of the general discourse, I feel that in a very weird way, a lot of Hindus are giving, my question to you is, am I wrong or right in understanding this? Like, a lot of Hindus, their arguments and their complaints that are coming across, they seem very Abrahamized to me. It doesn't stem out of from a very, saying, oh, but Shastra mein, in this book, this verse, this is written. Now that I'm willing to entertain as a serious debate. But if you're going to come back to me that, oh, this is like this is like that, this sounds a lot like those 18th century padres or, the current day mullahs to me, to be very honest. So Gopi, where have we gone wrong as a society in general? And this is not to you as a trans activist or an intersex activist, or this is just to me. I'm asking you this question as a human being. Like, where have we lost our dharmic essence? Where do you think we have lost it?
Again, for example, I'll tell you that these families are mostly, I don't know whether they are adhyatmic, whether they actually follow the texts or not. But if they want to put something in order, there is nothing called in order in our dharma, basically, because it comes with a natural order and it forms itself, where an individual should not interfere in it. And in this space, several acharyas and several avatars have been taking place. What is right in Sri Rama avatar is different in the Krishna avatar. There are more than at least 150 plus avatars. We celebrate Das Avatara. That's it. It doesn't mean that and how many people are aware of about the rest of the avatars and how many people celebrate it. So in the whole world now, our dharma is the only dharma which have gender specific ritual sacred spaces dedicated to people like us, people like me, people like Giti Ji, people like Abhijit, people belonging to the diverse Sogiyasi communities, where we were not told as that we are sinners, where we were made a direct connection with the the adhyatmic atma jnana of the great acharyas and the saints lived. So, and one of the most stupid thing I've been seeing with the so-called self-appointed protectors and guardians is that they neither know classical Tamil nor Sanskrit, and they neither read any of the serious texts in our dharma, before coming to argue, or because I have met people from the acharyas, the adhyaksha acharyas of at least 25 gurukuls in India. Most of these acharyas, they never kind of, said, oh, whatever you said is not right, Gopi, like that. They never said that, actually. Whatever you say is not wrong. Sorry, they never said whatever you said is not wrong, or, they don't even want to get inside that argument of evil, good, sin, non-sin, that concepts of Abrahamicness, because we are neither Anglo-Saxonized nor Indianized, I believe. And we got stuck up in the middle where, our people, they love to use Apple iPhones and like to use whatever they have in the world, and they don't consider it as West. And something suddenly, coming from our own tradition, where if I'm going to say Lord Krishna have been marrying Arjuna's son for more than at least 2 millennium, this ceremony is taking place, which is a living ceremony. I'm not talking about something which is, not practiced anymore. They will come and say, oh, horrible, or that's not part of Hindu Dharma. The Chaturvyuhas, the totems of that, we see the Shankha and Chakra is, reflected in Arvan worship, which means it is integral part of the tradition. Some acharyas may not agree with that. Whatever the Vaishnava acharyas of Madhva tradition, the Dvaita tradition is saying, Vishishta Advaita people may not agree with that. Whatever the Advaita tradition is saying, this too will not accept with that. And we need to have the differences, and these are not mere differences. These are about, you need to live in it more than, call it as a difference, I believe. And one of the most important thing I'm feeling is that the so-called progressive lipstick activists who sit on glass towers, who commercialize our identities from Bombay, Delhi, or Calcutta, or Bengaluru, or Hyderabad, or Chennai, these people make $1 million economy out of our identities. They try to destroy these indigenous, Indic, gender-specific sacred spaces and rituals, which are, under threat, which Hindu will, protect it. We are here to talk about it, to protect it. We don't know whether we can protect it, but at least by talking about this, such living traditions will get visibility, so that people will not narrow their views on, defining their own Hinduism and then imposing it on the larger communities who are living. I want to say, when Sri Ramanujacharya took his Tirumanjana, when he took bath and came out of the pond, he see that a lot of small kids, playing with the sand, and where they will be kind of putting Shankha and Chakra and, worshipping that, oh, this is Vishnu. And they will put some offering to that, made out of the small sand laddus, and they will come, they will see Sri Ramanujacharya, and they will, go near to him, and they will, they kind of give that small prasadam laddu, which is made of sand or whatever that prasadam, that to him. Sri Ramanujacharya, with more Shraddha and Bhakti, receives it, and he kind of accepts it. A person of his caliber is not questioning, oh, this is not a kind of a mandir, this is not the real ritual, this is not. He attests it as part of the Hindu Dharma. He is giving the equal importance of the prasadam, which comes from the Sri Ranganatha Swami Sannidhi itself. And this was the greatness of our acharyas, actually. They never kind of discriminated people based on their sex identity or gender identity. Our great acharyas, for example, my acharya comes from, Amba Samudram and they comes from a family of Mahapurna, who Mahapurna is the Acharya, who is also known as Periyanambi, who is the Acharya of Sri Ramanujacharya. My Acharya comes from the lineage of Mahapurna, and my Acharya will never look at what is in between my legs, whom I am going to sleep with in my bedroom. All he looks at is, am I leading a very healthy, dharmic, peaceful life where I am doing, the seva to our dharma as mentioned in the particular Sri Vaishnava traditional literatures. That's it. I mean, who are these people to come and kind of, let them talk, but let them talk in a more, evidence-based research with evidence-based backing. What they fail is that they approach everything, with the heteronormative binary views, where it is completely unscientific, which is completely wrong, because our understanding of sex as an identity, sex characteristics which is different from sex, gender identity expression, and sexual orientation need to be broadened, and we need to kind of sit and understand the difference between the terminologies I just mentioned. And do we have such terminologies before 1,000 or 2,000 years? We don't have the exact terminologies, but we do have the notions what these terminologies are referring to. And such notions are clearly seen in our, Sanatan Dharma than anything, because we don't see it with the Abrahamic traditions. We don't see it with any other traditions. Why should we only see it under the Dharmic tradition? It didn't only accepted, the people who are living in India. One last example I want to finish before, I finish is that the world first, the contemporary, the modern trans men, after Alan Turing was persecuted, the person who ended the Second World War, was compelled to commit suicide because of his sexual orientation in this Victorian British, by the Christian fundamentalists. And by seeing that, the person who got most affected was Dr. Michael Lawrence Dillon, who was assigned as female at birth, but then fled to India, where at the time this person was looking at what is happening to Tibet, was completely wiped off by the Maoists, and and Dalai Lama just entered, in India. When she came to India, she went to the Ladakhi Buddhist, the Vajrayana tradition, and she accepted their tradition. And also she was in the phase of transitioning as a man. And the Ladakhi monks, the Vajrayana Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist monks, they accepted this person and changed the name of the person as Lobsang Jivaka. They didn't inquire about what is your sex, oh, you are born as a female, or we should accept you or not. They didn't question all that. The very first European to be ordained under the Vajrayana tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist order, is from UK, but also a trans man. How many the so-called LGBTI warriors in India know about that? I mean, we always have this. It is not pink washing. It is not kind of, we always have this tradition of, including people respective of the expandable list of identities they carry on their head. If they are, not against the integrity of our dharma, we always celebrated them. Right? I mean,
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay, Giti, last couple of questions for you, and then we can wrap things up. So obviously somebody was like, in their opinion, LGBTQ communities, the way they're projected in pop culture today is problematic, and it does more harm than good, as opposed to the way you explained it beautifully, and Gopi too. So to understand the nuances of our scripture, Giti, and I'll ask you one more question after that. How do we deal with this nuance? Giti, you as a scholar, right? You are a scholar. You do this research. So how do you actually go about disseminating this information? Look, I've made this first attempt today where, Gopi has shared so many scriptural nuances. You have shared anthropological nuances. But how do we go about doing this again and again? So that's what somebody who's watching it live was trying to understand.
Well, I think we have to build up our own networks of communication. I mean, I think what's happened is that the other side is so much money. And we haven't had. I mean, I'm unemployed most of the time. So unless we really build up, foundations who support this work, who support a whole range of, critical thinking or even cultural thinking, because there's so much work to do, I feel, from an Indic perspective. Not just with the non-binary, but this in terms of understanding, in terms of cross-cultural work, etc., etc., etc. So one needs to build up some sort of a healthy tradition, which hasn't happened. And like I said, this is this is one of the fundamental bases of what's happened is that, okay, you have maybe a few spaces, a few traditional spaces which are carrying it on, but we're also a modern country. We also have, for instance, universities or whatever, and nothing is happening there. I mean, the entire ecosystem, like I said, in the universities has been taken over by these people. So unless we set up something else, we're not going to disseminate a lot of this work.
Yep.
I mean, also you see, coming back to the whole thing of scripture, now in a multi-cosmology, see, one of the things I found very fascinating under the umbrella of Hinduism is that you have all these different cosmologies. The problem is, how do you find your Ishta Devi or Devta? Which is not exclusive. It can be plural. And it can change over time.
Yeah.
Now, the word Ishta is, desire. Comes out of the desiring principle.
Yep.
So you have the notion of, an innate sort of, desire which propels you to something which is spiritual, something which is cosmogonic. And at the same time, it also grounds you on to whatever duty you have, dharmic duty you have to perform on this earth before you leave. I mean, that's one of the philosophical tenets of it. Now, also the whole idea is, how do you therefore integrate it in a modern context where so much is happening?
Yep.
You're part of the global geopolitics. There's all kinds of interventions being made. So you need a much more critical consciousness rather than this. I think what's happened is that we are seeing a certain seeing a certain political Hinduism, which is good at one level, because the other side has been so destructive. But on the other hand, this political Hinduism also needs to do much more work on much more differentiated levels. And this can only happen if we have an intervention and we have proper foundations to do this work. We have a cultural ministry which gives grants for this. And that we're not just dependent on just a few YouTube outlets or whatever. There's a hell of a lot of work which needs to be done. The last point also, another point that I was, coming back to your point on scriptures. Now you see, if you have a polycosmological cosmological, data bank, that's how I'd like to describe it, because the Hindu thing is you add on, you don't break. In the Western thing is you have a revolution, you destroy the previous god and you set up a new one.
True.
Or nihilism, God is dead and you get rid of everything. But here we sort of increment. We have our fights, then you navigate positions. So all of that is also happening in terms of our historical dynamic. Now within that, if you go into the notion of scriptures, every myth that you take will have, hundreds of variations. Now there's one myth which is, the two Bhags get together, and Bhagirath is, that's why you have the name Bhagirath. Bhag refers to the entirety of the female organ. So now from Bengal, you have this Bhage Bhage Karile Shringhar Ite hai Namatar Bhagirath. But you'll have in another text, which is anti this union. You will have basically, okay, these two women have gotten together, produced a kid, but because he's born from two bugs, he doesn't have a bone structure. So then the structure is given by somebody else. So you have anyway all these different variations. In another variation, King Dilip cannot have kids, so his two wives get together, and one is in the active principle and one is in the passive principle, and so they do it, and the kid is born eventually. But that's for me, the point is that you cannot therefore define any kind of one scripture or one book. And I think this is a problem where you have this very hard monotheism which comes, one of conversion. And there are other monotheisms which don't convert, where you're looking at the notion of a unifying cosmic principle. That's a different notion altogether. But when you have a destructive monotheism, which has been in your civilization system for more than 1,000 years, you need to do a lot of work, a lot of different kinds of work. And that is where I think we have to really create, universities, or we have to create more disseminative platforms. And I just think that I don't have a problem with the aggression that is coming out, because at least it's out. At least we can navigate this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody's gone through it. They've come out to their parents. The parents scream and shout. Some of them, not all. But, one parent will say, I'll kill myself, blah, blah, blah. And then 2 months later, the parent is receiving the girlfriend, boyfriend. So we have to rediscover even our own forms of psychological conflict management, navigation of difference. You can say, somebody will say, look, for me, it's still, I don't like it. I don't like, seeing two men kissing each other, or two women, whatever, But I'm not going to impose, I'm going to keep quiet.
Yep.
And likewise, I'm at a point in my life where I sort of reflect on also what my family is given, what kinship is all about. So that is another reason why I feel it's important to make this intervention, for the generations to come, because we live in a very family-oriented environment. I mean, my life was different because I was on the road. I was, this wouldn't apply to me because I'm a totally different frame of, I've had a totally different lifestyle. But many young people do not want to leave the fold of the family. They've got their cousins, they've got this, they've got that. Why should they go to bars? Actually, if you throw them out of this family space, you're pushing them into a very destructive kind of lifestyle, very dysfunctional kind of lifestyle. But if you're saying, okay, we integrate it, then you don't even make gender or homosexuality into an issue. I think that's why the left is so angry. Because if the issue goes, if the victimhood goes, where are they going to make a business out of us?
That's true.
Imagine, your cousins are accepting you, everybody's accepting you, you go for a family dinner or whatever, you bring your friend along. I mean, I have people in my family who have married their, same-sex partner, and the whole family was invited. Family has no issues. So you're totally integrated, therefore, in the family, and you've got this extra space. You can be there as an uncle, as an aunt, depending on what generation you are in. And I'll end off with just one thing. I met my cousin recently, and, because I'm doing this work on temples, and, I said, do you want to come with me to Surajkund? And of course, he hadn't been there for some 30, 40 years. But my story with my cousins was that, two of my cousins, very sweet. I used to say, look, I love going for a drive, and that time Delhi was beautiful. I used to say, take me for a motorcycle drive. Eventually, I got my own mobike. And so they would take me. Anyway, he came with me. And then, his son now remembers that I took him around in my Jeep. So he's taking me around today. So that is something very beautiful. And he's not married. We don't ask private. This is the other thing. This is really what I respect so much also about, many sections of, Hindu society, is that sometimes they respect your privacy much more. And this is not the orthodoxy speaking, but, the person who doesn't speak, the Hindu who doesn't speak.
Yeah.
Not going to, Go and
The
hit you
silent majority, as they say, the silent majority.
They respect your privacy. But I remember, when Modi won, and I was campaigning for Modi as part of the Chai Pe Charcha and whatever, and the BJP office called me early in the morning because it was one of their teams. They said, "Come over, for the results." And of course, the results happened, and I was very happy and jumping up and down, and everybody was hugging everyone. And then some woman comes, Indian woman from the New York Times or whatever. She said, "But what about you're being gay, blah blah blah? Don't you think this government is very bad?" And I thought to myself, who is she to ask me? Who is she to interfere in my private life? I said, "You want to speak to me in private? You can speak to me in private. You really want to know? I'll give you the whole background, because I do believe this government has done much more than the previous government has done." I mean, why did it take so long for 370 to go? $1 million Ford Foundation gave to get rid of the law. Why didn't it happen? When the NGO who got the money, got so much money, didn't do anything. Because the woman who headed the NGO was also part of the Congress ecosystem.
Not many people know that.
This is the problem of the inner ethics of a certain elite structure of the GLBTQ, who have profited, who have made a business out of it. And that's why I really feel that if you integrate, then the issue is no more. And that's what we should aim for. We should not aim to put Christ. What the West does, the Christians do. They re-crucify Christ all the time. And I keep saying, take Christ. Take him down, damn it. Let him live a normal life. Why do you crucify him all the time? So, what idea should be? Get rid of your victim issues. Integrate in whatever form you can.
Giti ji, I want to also highlight that the 377 issue or the LGBTI rights, actually it's, apart from activists like you, the so-called mainstream movement now was started as an HIV, intervention issue or like an MSM issue, right? It didn't started as an, actually at the time, how many people were aware of the term LGBT, before a decade? And like suddenly, like all these people come and like, oh, LGBT rights, and like we still have schools in rural villages where they don't talk about reproductive, health and hygiene, talking about such issues, or highly stigmatized issues, or like we still have female infanticide. And we need to take care of intersex, children and protect intersex infanticide from, we don't want intersex infanticide in India. And a lot of, issues on the ground need to be focused. But what else is happening is that in the past, 7 to 8 years, I've been seeing a lot of people writing opinions. And even recently, a person mentioned a so-called self-appointed, a person, self-appointed activist from the LGBTI community, in his book mentioned Giti Thadani G is dead.
Yeah.
And by hearing that,
dead and queer.
Yeah, you tell about that. I mean, like, see, these people threaten me because I had a very different opinion on the present government, and they disinvited me. They shamed me. I mean, in 2012, we were also doing pride parades, holding placards, but those placards were about science. Those placards were about diversity. Those placards were about understanding the diversity in our community. But these days, we are seeing placards, and the girls who are holding these placards talk about sexism, feminism, and equality, and they hold a placard saying that Modi is a dick I cannot handle. And this placard gang, goes with Shaheen Bagh, or, they believe Kashmir is an independent country, or they believe Assam is an independent country, or they believe, like Tamil Nadu should be separated from India, and they are dividing the community, in the caste lines. And they don't want people like Giti ji, to come out and speak. Nobody want to engage her, or like they don't want people like me to speak on various issues, and their funding is structured in a manner that nobody can intervene in it, and it's a multi-billion-dollar funding which will disturb the social stratification of India. And the most important thing, our second largest intelligence partner is Israel. If at all we need to learn something from Israel, Israel accepts their LGBTI community. I'm not saying everything there is good for them, but compared to many West Asian countries, Israel is far better. Israel is not Iran or Iraq or Pakistan. Israel allows the openly gay lesbian men to serve in their army. We need to kind of collaborate with them, and even if possible, Indo-Israel Sogiasi Forum or certain things we need to. Even I heard Abhijit speaking about Russian aggression on these things, but the 60% of the majority of the Jewish population in the Israel comes from Russian, the former Soviet Union countries, who are well versed in Russian.
Wait a second. I mean, the issue with Israel is different, because I think that, they came really from all over Europe, and then also a whole lot from West Asia, because they were kicked out of West Asia as well. I mean, 1 million or something, pretty huge amount of. When I was traveling in Israel, there was really no. You see, the thing is, a way the Israeli society has dealt with their religious orthodoxy. You see, also one thing in the religious orthodoxy in Israel is that they still value the mind. That's the difference. There's one difference in Judaism, is that you're always asking critical questions, even though it may be very gender orthodox. But you're still basically, asking critical questions to your God. You're fighting with your God, etc., etc., etc. So you don't produce this kind of, like what I say is, you don't have to re-crucify every time. And I think this is why also the GLBTQ movement in Israel, because I met many of them, they didn't have to fight in the same way. Whereas if you see what happened in the West, Hitler had them in concentration camps. England was, look at what England did. I mean, to not just Alan Turing, but also to Oscar Wilde. I mean, also Somerset Maugham had to leave the country. So, some of their best writers left. And practically all over Europe, therefore, you had this sort of criminalization of, homosexuality, though some of the best writers and artists, etc., are gay. And you have the same thing in pre-communist Russia as well, because the famous composer Tchaikovsky was actually, now, some of his biographers are saying that he was killed. I mean, he basically was forced to commit suicide. So they were coming from a very hard oppression, very hard and oppressive. And I think that's why when the movements were made, there was a lot of, they were able to change it post-war. I think without the Second World War, this wouldn't have happened. You needed the Second World War, you needed a certain amount of time to rebuild, and then you had these very powerful gender movements. But now what's happened is it's shifted back into a combination, a very dangerous combination of nihilism and victim politics. And that is lethal. That is absolutely lethal. And that is what has come to India. And the problem with these Indians is they're rooted nowhere. They have no idea of their own culture, and they have no idea of any other history or culture. And I think the best example is what's happening in Bollywood. You have absolutely nothing rooted to your own culture. I mean, I work with the visual. You're not even going around to India finding beautiful sites where you can, film in. You've got so much rich history. You've got so much rich visual culture. You've got so many visual traditions. Nothing. All you're doing is producing this crazy crap, which is then being viewed by who? By the Gulf countries. Not even, they're making their profits elsewhere.
Fair enough. I agree. So, you know what? I think, it's time to wrap things up. To be very honest, I learned a lot today, and it's very interesting. Somebody left a comment, and I think it was a comment and a question, but I think it kind of sums up our emotions on this entire issue. So the guy's name is Shantanu. He says we have an entire pantheon of gods and goddesses displaying all kinds of shades. We're people of the land and not the book. Shouldn't change be accepted if it does good to many people of our own society? I think nobody could have put it in a better way than Shantanu has. In just in a few words, he's kind of said, यार हम लोग में कब से ये प्रॉब्लम हो गई, हम तो ऐसे नहीं थे, since when did we become like this? And that I'm actually very grateful to both you, Gopi, and Giti. Obviously Abhijit, as always, Abhijit has been on the podcast many times, so first of all, thanks a lot to both of you for coming on the podcast. But my closing remarks, I always leave my closing remarks to the end of the session, so I'm just going to tell everybody my thoughts. Like, I still don't know why the Hindu Marriage Act and not the Special Marriage Act. Like, in my brain always works ki, we should go to a uniform civil code. And at the end of the day, to me, I get the divine aspect of it. Everybody knows I'm a disbeliever, but it doesn't mean that I don't understand the other side's claims, right? I do get it. Like, for me, I have, like I was telling Giti offline too, that this entire fight to me sounds so funny as a disbeliever, because there is one side that says only we have the right to this piece of paper. That's because to me as a disbeliever, marriage is what? Just a piece of paper, because we as human beings live with each other, form relationships with each other, not because of that piece of paper, right? Because what is marriage to me? I'm not saying it is to you or to the believers on the LGBT side, so please don't get triggered by what I'm saying. But for me, it is fascinating that both sides are saying, like, we also have a right to that piece of paper, and the other side is saying, no, you don't have any right to that piece of paper. I just find it so funny as a disbeliever. I was like, what are you guys fighting about? First of all, if marriage is allowed in a society, if you ask me, it should be allowed to everyone as long as there is consent involved. And if two people are willing to be consensually married to each other, they should be allowed. I don't know since when did that become a problem. I mean, I find it extremely off-putting, if you ask me, at a personal level. So whether you're LGBT, you're trans, you're intersex, it doesn't matter, man. If you want to get married, you should be getting married. As far as all these arguments about, it is going to lead to this, it is going to lead to that, listen, we have seen pedophiles who are heterosexuals too. So what are you going to do then? I mean, what are you talking about? What has that got to do with anything? What has pedophilia got to do with homosexuality? There is no data, no research, nothing. I mean, you should read a few papers at least, and to make such disgusting allegations about our own people, fellow human beings, is actually so sad that we say these things. And also on the cultural side, I mean, we come from a culture that even accepted Nastikas like me, right? I mean, I'm a living Nastic. I don't believe in anything. I don't believe in reincarnation. I don't believe in karma. I don't believe there are gods. I don't believe there are goddesses. I still celebrate this culture. Even to this date, I'll go to a Hare Krishna temple, I'll look at a Aarti, and I'll enjoy it while I don't believe a bit of it. I'll still enjoy it. I'm a part of this culture. And that same right applies to LGBTQ, or like Gopi likes to call it in another terminology. These people are part of our society. This was never the Hindu way. It was never the Hindu way to, discriminate against people. And this is why I say the thing that worries me the most is the Abrahamization of the Hindu mind. That's what worries me the most. That we're becoming Abrahamic. In fighting the enemy, we should take their good traits. We don't become like them. We're copying their worst traits. The witch hunts, the lynch mobs, everything. We're taking all their their monotheism, and we're rejecting our pluralism for what? Their monotheism. Even when 377 was decriminalized, guess who opposed? The church and the ulama. They opposed it. I mean, were there riots in India? Were Hindus going on the streets and saying, nahi chalegi, tanashahi, nahi chalegi? Nobody did anything. Because guess what? Hindus did not give a damn. Because they're like, hang on, why should it be decriminalized? Acha ho gaya, decriminalized ho gaya. At least in my extended friend circle, family circle, nobody cared. Why would you have a problem with LGBTQ people getting married? I mean, I don't get it. only you have a right to get married, though they don't have a right to get married. It never makes sense. So please think about these issues. If your objection is to why only Hindu Marriage Act, I still say that's a valid counter. But my answer to that would be, heck, we should go to a uniform civil code in this country. We're a secular country, right? We're a democracy, right? We should get rid of all these religion-based laws, and we should have a uniform civil code while we don't destroy any rituals and any traditions, because rituals and traditions add to the beauty of a culture, but that can be incorporated. And if you still oppose it, this is my request to all of you, to the ones who are opposing it, leave your comments below. For a change, I will actually read the comments. I never read the comments of my videos because, as they say, YouTube comments are a cesspool of mediocrity. But I'll still read the comments this time. And I'll try to reach out to Giti and Gopi again. I'm not talking about the abusive comments, but the sensible comments. If you have some sensible objections as to why this should not happen, leave some comments below. And let's take this conversation forward. But I'm clear. I support this. This should have happened yesterday, not today. It should have happened the day we became an independent republic. It did not happen. I mean, I'm not to be blamed. By Chacha Nehru se baat karo, maine to kuch nahi kiya. You blame Nehru for whatever has happened. And you know what? On that note, I'd like to wrap today's session. And once again, if you like what I'm doing over here, please subscribe to the podcast, like the video. Once again, leave your comments. I'm going to read them this time. And if you want to support what I'm doing over here, you can go to YouTube, become a member, or you can see the ticker on the screen. You can go on Patreon and subscribe, become a patron supporter. Until then, I'll see you next time. Namaste. Take care. Goodbye.
Namaste.